Hi, and thanks for joining me once again in another one of my videos. I am Alex, and I am the Wandering Englishman. In today's video, I have a look around this historic site called the House of the Blackheads, found in the centre of Old Town Riga. Don't go away, join me on this adventure, and hopefully we all learn something together. Now, this is a building situated right in the centre of the old town of Riga. Upon making this video, the price for entry is €6 for adults and slightly lower if you're a student. The original building was first erected during the first third of the 14th century by the Brotherhood of the Blackheads. Now I guess you're asking, who the hell are the Brotherhood of the Blackheads? Well, if you're not from Latvia or possibly Estonia, you may not have heard of them, but they are a guild for unmarried merchants. So if you're married, you need not apply to this. Singles only. I guess you could say it was the 14th century single man's club. Possibly Tinder, who knows? But they consisted of ship owners and foreigners in Riga. Potentially, if I live in Riga, I could possibly join this club, should they accept me. The building that we're exploring today obviously isn't the same building that was erected in the third quarter of the 14th century. The building that we're exploring today was rebuilt between 1996 and 1999. The reason for that, the building was completely destroyed almost by the Germans. The Germans had a considerable impact on the capital of Latvia. You might recall from my video where I visited Europe's biggest market, the Germans housed the Zeppelin in their 5 hangars before they were outcast by the Soviets. The building was almost destroyed in its entirety on June 28, 1941. That was the week the Nazis launched Operation Barbarossa. What was left of the building was pretty much destroyed in its entirety by the Soviets in 1948. So between 1941 and 1948, 7 years, basically a crater was left on this square. The Soviets did in fact eventually pave over it, but thankfully with the foresight of Latvians, funds were raised and the rebuilding process began in the middle of the 90s. Anyone that donated more than 5 lats, that was roughly between 7 and 11 euros back then, they could symbolically add to one of the bricks in the wall. Apparently more than 5,000 people from Riga and the Latvian region contributed to the House of the Blackheads, and this impressive building was finished December 9th, 1999, so just before the new century. Nowadays, as you can see, the House of the Blackheads is this fascinating museum. It has a basement, it has a ground floor, and it has 2 upper floors. I have to admit, I found myself wandering around this museum in a sense of awe. One, I was completely unaware. My knowledge when it came to who the Blackheads were was limited until I visited this museum. But I have to admit, what a wonderful, wonderful place. And also, what is fascinating, the Brotherhood of the Blackheads came about during the 14th century. Generally, they were Estonians, Latvians, and foreigners, and like I said earlier, single men. It seemed colour didn't seem to matter to them, and I think for that time that's incredibly impressive. Even in 21st century Europe, that is impressive.
So I'm in the House of the Blackheads. I'm in the original cellar. This cellar is the only thing that survives since the building was destroyed in 1941, in basically the middle of the Second World War. And pretty much guess why that happened. And this cellar is what remains. The House of the Blackheads, in my opinion, seem very close to Masons. They were originally called the Knights of King Arthur. Then gravitated towards worshipping a martyr, a black martyr.
The coat of arms of the Brotherhood of the Blackheads, it's an interesting coat of arms. It features 3 black men, whereas most coats of arms feature lions and bears and eagles, whereas this one is 3 black men, clearly from the center of Africa. However, the exact term for Blackheads is unknown. The patron saint, who I imagine is one of the 3 men on the coat of arms, or maybe it's the same person, was the black Egyptian Christian, Saint Maurice. I think he's the person whose head appears on the shield. I think it's the same person at the top of the coat of arms, but I could be wrong. It's still very unclear whether the patron saint was chosen because of the name or whether the saint precedes the name. That remains unclear. Saint Maurice is an interesting character, actually. He was born in Egypt, so he's Egyptian, in the city of Thebes, and he commanded a legion. As he progressed through life, he climbed up the Roman ranks, and he commanded a legion of 1,000 soldiers called the Thebians, or Thabians, the Thebes. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but let's come back to that in a moment. Down here in the basement, the furnaces made of brickwork warm the entire building. Very impressive design, but at the same time no longer working. But interesting to see how it worked on display. So a little bit more detail on Saint Maurice. And there's the very handsome man there. Notice how Egyptians back in the day looked more like Central Africans rather than the Egyptians we know today, because of course this was long before the Arab conquest of North Africa. So generally Egyptians back then were very black. Not all of them, but a lot of them, has to be said. It is even documented that many Egyptians were very Mediterranean looking, not in the same way that they look today. The Egyptians of today are so far unrelated to the Egyptians of 1800 to 2000 years ago. A lot's changed since then. But going back to Saint Maurice and his achievements, he commanded a legion of 1,000 soldiers. He was born 250 years AD. What makes him the saint that he is, he was a Christian before Christianity was really acceptable. 250 years after Christ, Christianity was still in its infancy, and the fact that this man commanded a legion of 1,000 soldiers, all Christians, and also in the Roman army, as Christianity was considered a threat to the Roman Empire. Yet Saint Maurice and his legion moved easily within pagan society. That was until Maurice and the Theban Christian legion were sent by Maximian, the Roman Caesar of the time, who lived between 286 and 305 AD. He sent Maurice and his legion to what is now present-day Switzerland. He was ordered by Maximian to harass some local Christians. Maurice and his legion refused. Maximian ordered the punishment of the legion by executing every 10th soldier. This punishment was known as decimation. Decimation is a form of Roman military discipline in which the 10th man of every group is executed by members of his cohort. The discipline was used by senior commanders in the Roman army to punish units. Back in the day, the Roman army used this punishment on large units of groups guilty of capital offences, such as cowardice, mutiny, and desertion. But in this case, Maximian used the punishment on Maurice's legion for their refusal to harass and possibly execute fellow Christians. The Theban Christians refused to attack their fellow Christians in what is known as the Great St. Bernard Pass in a little place called Aganon, which is now called Saint Maurice. And in Saint Maurice, there is an abbey dedicated to this man, Saint Maurice. Saint Maurice's legion and himself were all martyrs to Christianity. It is said that the legion refused to harass the innocent Christians that inhabited the town. So the Emperor Caesar Maximian ordered Maurice and his men to be sacrificed to the Roman gods, hence a Christian martyr of the time, and a noble man.
quite amazing, this place being rebuilt in 1999 into all its glory, and probably surpassing its previous glory. And quite amazing in terms of the saintly worship, Saint Maurice, right in Northern Europe. And because these people were travelers, they liked St. Maurice's vibe. I respect that. And I believe that's him up there in heaven. Quite impressive. The Knights of King Arthur turning into the Blackheads, going through some historical times and then rising from the ashes post-World War II, post the Soviet days. In 1999, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, this place was rebuilt.
Has to be said, a very impressive building, and the whole time I was there, despite the fact these guys weren't Masons, they felt very Masonic in who they are, although they do have a lot of similarities, the Blackheads, to the Masons. However, like the Masons, I learnt that the Brotherhood of Blackheads incorporates a lot of alcohol into their ceremonies. They often have elaborate drinking vessels, they have a code of honor, they have strict rules governing relationships between members. Members are fined or punished should they break the rules. They took swordsmanship very seriously back in the day. I don't think it's really relevant to 21st century Blackheads, but certainly in the between the 14th century and probably the 17th and 18th centuries, they took swordsmanship incredibly seriously. All in all, a great little museum, great value for €6. I honestly give this museum, and I'm not sponsored by them in any way, a strong 9 out of 10, simply for the fact that I learnt a lot during my visit to this museum. Knowledge that I really wasn't aware of. And once again, I really appreciate the fact you've been watching. If you like this, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. If you have something to say, if you want to correct me, leave a comment in the comments below, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Click subscribe, you'll get notified, and it really helps me out. Until next time, I'll see you then.